Hello and welcome back to the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. I am Sam Williams, and this week we've got a podcast with Eric from the Fliers Club. For anyone who doesn't know about the Fliers Club, they're an absolutely fascinating business operating out in the States. They're purveyors of some seriously fine quality merchandise, and their photography on Instagram is absolutely second to none. But beneath all that, they're also deeply passionate about the game, and the large part of their business revolves around organizing events and trips for their members, and they're just super passionate guys about the game. And we wanted to talk to them all about golf travel, both coming over to the UK for the American tourist and vice versa. We got about 10 minutes into the pod as well and realized Bruce hadn't turned his mic on, so hence why his audio is a bit scratchy for the first part. But yeah, it's a really good discussion. We hope you enjoy it. We recorded it just before we went up to Scotland. So we're obviously talking about our visit to Crail before we realised how great that was. But yeah, it's a really good chat, and we hope you enjoy the pod.
Watch this. No way!
Eric, welcome to the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. How are you both?
Yeah, very good. We were saying before we joined, with golf's recently reopened. So yeah, absence makes the heart grow fonder, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. You guys, as the emergence from that that lockdown must be forever sweet, and especially in the name of golf and opening the courses, you just stretch your legs and go play. I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah. Are you based in Boston, Eric? Are you play much golf up there at the minute?
Yeah, home base is Boston. Where I'm looking out at it's 65 and sunny here. So we'll take it for April. It seems like an early spring for us, which is great. I think when we last spoke, it's usually around the time where we start to question why we live in this part of the country, because we're coming out and, the holidays are great because you have the snow and the changing of seasons. But right in the February, March timeframe, it just gets, cold, damp, dreary, and it just feels like there's no end in sight. So
how long are you off golf for during that cold snap? So how long do the courses shut for typically?
Typically, depending on the golf course, we'll go probably end of November through mid-March. Some courses you'll catch a couple days in there that you can play on temp greens, but majority of the golf courses in the Northeast are either shut or they're just gone to temp greens. And truth be told, there's only a few brave souls that venture out at that time of the year.
It's hard, isn't it? I think. I mean, I don't know loads about the US kind of weather, climate, and how it all flows between the seasons. But, you've got to go quite a decent way down south in the States and not kind of be affected too much by the winter, haven't you? I think even places like South Carolina, they still get a bit of a cold snap and stuff. And, was it recent event out in Austin, Texas? Like even there, that had really cold weather. And I think, maybe the British listener looks at this and thinks, well, yeah, golf in America, it's sunshine every day, but it's just not the case.
Yeah, it's all relative, I think, depending on what your winter is. If your winter is, 50 to 60 degrees, or your winter is, 16 to 25, it's, again, it's all relative. And we call them the snowbirds who leave New England and head down to Florida or the South in general just to play. And that's kind of the migratory pattern of even the PGA professional from the North courses. During those closed months, they go down and they work in the wintertime down in Florida because, that migration of golf happens. So it's really interesting.
And speaking of migration, tell us a bit about a Fliers Club then, because obviously, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about how it all started and your initial trips to Scotland, but perhaps for the benefit of our listeners, you kind of just give us an insight into how this kind of brand came to be what we know today.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Fliers is, my background's been in golf, but it's been in golf travel in different spots along the way. But we started Fliers in 2016, and really with the idea of just focusing on a bit more depth of the experience. And what I mean by that is that there are plenty of opportunities to go out there and play 36 holes a day, drink your face off, go to the hotel, rinse, repeat for 7 days. You sleep when you get home. And, for us, it was kind of defeating the purpose of why we travel to begin with, which is this whole idea of discovery and immersion and, meeting new cultures, food, wine, drink, whatever it may be. I mean, that's the whole reason why we travel, is to experience new. And it gives you hope, it gives you opportunity, and it creates this global citizenship, tolerance, all those things that kind of go into travel. And we were seeing that a lot of that was just being overlooked by perhaps the American traveler going to the UK and Ireland, and around the world. And we started by creating experiences that had a bit more of a deeper dive into not only we're playing some world-class golf courses, but we're also focusing on some overlooked golf courses, as well as the culture that surrounds them. And we were particularly enamored with, that feeling of history and tradition that just seems to ooze out of clubs in the UK, and Ireland for that matter. And, just celebrating that, everything from, the signs and the quirkiness of different things along the way. I mean, so that's the stuff that sparkles, and that's the stuff that again we celebrate. So that's really where the ethos began, and we kind of progressed, and really started working with a different type of clientele, than I would say majority of folks putting together experiences.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at the traveler, and spending time in Scotland is a really good example. You see Americans kind of coming, washing through, whether it's Fife or East Lothian, and they tell you about their tour, and you're like, man, that is just way too much. You are biting off way too much here. Like, they're flying to Ayrshire and they'll go and play Turnberry and Troon, and then they'll go over to St Andrews and play the old course. Then they'll go up to Carnoustie, and then they'll try and get themselves back down to Muirfield, and then they'll get themselves up to Castle Stewart before flying home. And you're like, that's a crazy amount of travel. And you're pretty much playing one type of course as well, like trophy courses essentially, or open rotor stuff. And you miss so much. And it's a shame, because it is the best parts of a travel is when you kind of stuck somewhere for a little bit, and you like you say, you kind of immerse yourself. So I guess that's pretty hard when you're dealing with clients as well, isn't it? To almost hold them back to a certain extent. Does that make sense?
I always say that people, the golfer in general often goes over to check a box, but comes back bragging about the golf course that you've never heard of. And that's more and more than the case where, East Lothian is an example. They're going over there. They want to play Muirfield. They've heard so much about the lunch, they want the afternoon round or whatever. But then they come back and it's, they're bragging about Kilspindie, or, going to Fife and playing St Andrews. Yeah, we all know the old course is the magnet, but, perhaps coming back and bragging about Ely and Crail, and or places like Mercar or Brora up in the Highlands. The list goes on, and I think that those more and more are becoming kind of the centerpieces. And at the end of the day, like, when people come back and they're like, man, that golf course you put in there that I'd never heard of before, really just where are we going next? Because anybody can sell the championship golf courses, in my opinion.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because you think it's the championship golf course ideal that I guess we've talked about there. Do you think that's maybe partly a cultural thing? I know we mentioned before that, by and large, pretty much every open rotor course, or certainly every open rotor course, and most of the kind of what would be considered top tier courses in the UK, you can get on and you can pay and play at. Now, you might not be able to go into the clubhouse and have the fully immersive experience, but I guess because of a lot of land in the UK being common land, right. Do you think that's quite attractive to American tourists coming over and being able to play all of these courses they see on TV and they know are very, very historic venues? Whereas I guess stateside, which is where you also have a very, very interesting business out there with top tier clubs, it's a lot more private and exclusive. Do you think that's maybe part of the attraction when they come over to Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the box checking and also the perception is like, it's just different culturally. I I mean, I think that golf is ingrained in the UK's culture. It's just part of life. It's perhaps not as much of a status thing as it is in the United States. And at least from my perception, and I know that's probably different when you're in it, but in the States, private clubs are truly private. You can't get on unless you know a member, or perhaps it's a different access point, but you can't just rock up and play. That just doesn't happen. Those opportunities aren't there, and that's the challenge, right? So you've got golf courses that you see on TV, whether it's the U.S. Open or the PGA Championship, that rotate through. Obviously, Augusta is in its own stratosphere in itself, but you keep going, and initially the USGA was making a push to play on golf courses that were public, like Torrey Pines, like Bethpage Black,
Harding Park, another one.
Yeah, exactly. And so it just became more of that initiative. But to get more to your point, I think it is a big deal for Americans to come over. But once they've done it, and unfortunately they check a box, and that's part of like Flyers' big thing is that we get that you want to go check a box, but we're not always about just checking the box. We want to celebrate going that one step further. If you're playing a championship golf course, finding something that is just completely, maybe it's a fact. You're stumping the golf historian that they perhaps didn't know before going in. I think that to us was just the whole feeds into our motto of travel further. It was just like dig deeper, travel further, discoveries in the details. And for us, that's everything. So we try to get those individuals who are trying to check that box. It's almost an education piece when you're having those conversations.
Yeah, a lot of synergies there with obviously what we're trying to do as well, with a lot of our films recently having been kind of historically focused and trying to capture the history of these clubs, and not just the courses and the links that you go and play on, actually just trying to understand how it all fits together, in a broad sense, and not just kind of the sport of playing the game. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're uncovering those long traditions, and I feel like when you talk about in America, an old golf course is 100 plus, maybe 120 years old, right? Maybe 130 is one of the oldest. And you go to Scotland and England and Ireland, I mean, you're getting back, Scotland in particular, you're going back so far, and it's amazing to me. You're just 3-4 generations of individuals, families that have perhaps played the golf course or whatnot, and that is just so much. I mean, the depth is incredible.
Well, Crail's a great example. So we're actually, by the time we release this, we will have been to Crail, but we are going to Crail when we are recording this, and that's 1786. That's one of the first golf clubs. I think there's arguments over it whether it's 6th or 7th, but 1786, Mozart was performing premiers, in those days, and you're like, whoa, that's crazy, like long when you think about, the history that's there. But then there's a lot of, you've got places in the States as well, like Chicago is a really good example, isn't it? Lucky I've been to Palmetto, which, hangs a sort of certificate on the wall from, really when it was the founding of, it was the USGA at the time. Your brand is exciting, isn't it? I think, the pictures you guys put up, everything's built around, maybe more, it seems to be more built around like an Instagram generation. Do you see a massive difference, Eric, with the clientele and what they expect from a golf trip now than perhaps a different generation? That kind of whole thing around the brand you're building, Harry the Hare, you've got the whole notion of adventure and wanting to kind of go further off the beaten track. Do you see that as being a big thing in the States in terms of that kind of demographic at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, historically, the international traveler is, for better or worse, it's expensive to travel internationally and play golf. We all know that piece of it. I think that for a lot of folks, for us, we're seeing the individual traveler, at least in our world right now, is decidedly a bit younger. And we love that piece of it in part because, they're not set in their ways at this point. Like they're open. There's this opportunity, this blank slate of like new discovery, where there's plenty of opportunity for, you know, kind of that 55, 60 plus who are now traveling, who are looking to, you know, they've done it and gone beyond. So I think that we use Instagram obviously as a platform to connect, and we know that demographic is 25 kind of to 45 that engages with Flyers. And, you know, we're telling stories and putting it together with, you know, the branding with Harry and packaging that piece up, because, you know, we want to tell more of our story. And our goal for us is for travelers for people to travel with us. Now, we know that sometimes, you know, the individual at 25 to 30 may not have the wherewithal to do that. But at some point, if they feel like they are involved in the club, maybe you know, they're purchasing you know, something from our shop, but they believe in the whole kind of ethos that we're putting out and the stories that we're telling, but they just don't have the wherewithal perhaps to travel, you know, and they kind of go on from that standpoint. And I think the club for us means different things to different people. In that scenario, you've got the international travel, we've got our domestic events, and then we've got our merchandise, and each of those kind of speaks to, you know, where you are in your journey of life, of golf. And, you know, there's never really this obligation that, oh my gosh, you have to go spend this amount of money, or, you know, you can't be in part of the club. And we've always kind of based ourselves on the exact opposite of, you know, how golf is perceived, private golf is perceived in the States, which is, you know, it's driven by what you do, your status, what you make a year. And we really just want to curate an audience that actually just has a deeper appreciation, not necessarily deeper wallets.
And is it a bit of a mixture there when you're doing, you know, international trips? Is it a combination of individuals who are kind of contacting you and saying, look, I want to look into going to Scotland, can you kind of hook me up with an itinerary there, and I want to play courses in around this area? And are you then maybe pairing them up with other people who are kind of, again, like-minded and looking for a similar trip? Are you kind of doing group bookings as well? Is it a whole mixture of people who, I guess, all in some way or another are connected to, you know, what Flyers Club are about, and the ethos that you kind of convey on social media?
Yeah, I think that you know, it's different. Like, you know, as far as the trips are concerned, I think I mentioned when we started in 2016, because we were looking through that almost educational lens, we started working with college teams and development offices who are supporting those college teams inside universities, and you know, we're working with alumni of those schools. And then we've progressed and built kind of more of that audience who are, you know, groups who are coming in from members, or they're coming in through, you know, different avenues in that regard. The membership piece of things and the club itself, we're providing that expertise obviously to our members, but also we're providing kind of our, what we would call fixed departures. And so it's, hey, we are going to the Highlands in September. This is where you're going to play. These are the dates. And you can sign up as a single golfer, versus, hey, I've got to rustle up 7 of my mates to go. You know, we got to go the whole back and forth, check with the powers that be to make this work. And then, you know, okay, well, those dates don't work. Maybe this financially doesn't work. And one guy really wants to play this course, another guy wants to play this course. It takes all of that out of there. And, you know, being a Flyers Club member, you can sign on to that experience in that regard. So we do offer kind of that private bespoke travel, which is more in the traditional vein of experiences coming over from the US to the UK, but then also embodying that model of that fixed departure for our members and their guests.
And this is probably a hopelessly broad question, but just out of, you know, pure curiosity, are there any spots that maybe surprise you initially that as being particular favorites amongst your the people you're kind of sending on these trips? Obviously, as you mentioned, St Andrews is a bit of a magnet, and open rota venues are often, you know, sought out. But are there any spots, any regions or courses that keep kind of cropping up that maybe fly below the radar?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love the Aberdeen area with Cruden Bay and Royal Aberdeen and Mercar. and then moving up to the Highlands to do something in, kind of Royal Dornoch obviously becomes the centerpiece, as does Aberdeen and Cruden. But, Aurora or Fortros and Nairn, and Castle Stewart to some extent as well. And, oftentimes, for better or worse, we talk about the magnet. A lot of when you're educating individuals about going over there, it's like pushing them to other places. Like, did you know there's another golf course besides the old course in Scotland? And a lot of that time is spent, kind of educating. People forget that Dornoch is in the top 20 in the world, and it's often overlooked, in my opinion, which is it's amazing. So again, you're educating these individuals who are going over there. But I particularly love that piece of it. It checks a couple of boxes, but boxes that maybe aren't your first thought for going to Scotland. That oftentimes for what I see is maybe their second or third trip.
It's really interesting because we can only liken what you're doing to maybe the stuff that's out there for the British audience now, which I don't know how best to summarize it, but it's a lot more, I would say, mainstream. So, large volume tour operators. We have Europe on our doorstep. So places like Spain and Portugal are really popular. We know there's world-class golf courses in Holland. No one ever goes to Holland and plays golf. It's strange that, and that, it's clearly the market for whatever reason hasn't evolved to that sense of, I don't think that same sense of adventure as maybe, your guys are looking for. Flipping it around the other way, traveling to the States, we're in a world where, the British regulations around things like restrictions, they're looking at virus rates. United States is looking like a place that on a sort of traffic light system would almost be preferred people going to Holland, maybe to holiday to the US rather than maybe Europe, perhaps. Where would you steer them to? Because, I've only been out to the States a couple of times. Bruce, you've been a few more times. There's so much breadth on offer. There's so much depth. There's so many amazing courses. And there's that whole crazy sort of public and private and, where can I play? Where can't I play? How does the British golfer that wants to go to the States start to pick that apart? Because that's a complete, that's I'm not saying your job's easy here, Eric. But you can get people on most courses when you put them on a plane, and most of them are drivable within a certain range. I don't even know where to start. Looking at the States, give us some nuggets.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think the hardest thing is the private nut to crack, because we're going back to the point of they see it on TV, they want to play it. It's a very herd mentality in that regard. But I think the reality is for the visiting golfer, majority of the visiting golfer is going to be going towards these, kind of remote resorts that we're seeing, the Whistling Straits of the world, Bandon Dunes, Sand Valley, Stream Song, down to, Pinehurst and, Pebble. Obviously, it's a big one, and it's a very different model than what we see in the UK. That is decidedly a stay and play model, and it's really, the more remote that the resort is, the better it is for, I think the traveler who's going. They appreciate it because it's now, and it's better for the resort itself because they have you on campus. You're staying there, you're eating there, you're playing there.
100% wallet share. They've got every penny. It's kind of, and everyone says places like Bandon's an incredible experience, unrivaled. But exactly like you say, you're kind of almost in that stay, and you're on resort. You're not necessarily hopping from club to club, and that's something you get in the UK because you get those stories, you get those different feels. That the clubhouse is totally different to where you were yesterday, and there's something, I don't know, maybe I'm talking nonsense here, but there's something really cool about turning up to a golf club you've never been to before. Mm-hmm. From the moment you get out of the car and go into the locker rooms and the clubhouse, and everything has a different vibe. But maybe it's just me that's obsessed by that. But maybe that's why, you kind of if you want to look beyond that sort of Bandon, Pinehurst, kind of model.
Well, I think it's also the membership thing as well, right? The idea that, perhaps some of the more, dare I say it, private exclusive clubs, the opportunity to meet a member and play with a member and just get an insight into what it's like, you know, for them playing their golf there. I think that's a very, very neat insight that, you know, that almost permeates a lot of golf in the UK, doesn't it? You can kind of, obviously geographically the challenges are nowhere near as great in the UK, but being hosted by a member at places, that's a nice experience as well. And I guess you lose out on that at places like Pebble Beach and Bandon and Stream Songs. As far as I know, it's not a membership structure that really operates there. As you say, it's a kind of resort model.
Yeah. And I, you know, I don't want to discount those experiences, because I think that they are one thing, but as we're kind of, you know, going through the nuance of the differences of club membership versus, you know, decidedly that resort model, you know, I think as a golfer, at least from Flyers perspective, we're seeking that authenticity, that you know, you're walking in, it's like, this is not only I'm a visitor here and I'm really grateful to be here, but this is a working, operating, living, breathing thing that you're walking into. It's a club, and it's been here for hundreds of years, and I've now come here and I'm discovering it for the first time. But for many in the UK, this is my everyday when golf is happening. Like I come in and I go to the locker room, I get changed, I go out, I have a few putts, and then I go play. And I have my regular 4-ball, 2-ball, 3-ball, whatever that is. Whereas the other ones we just identified in the States, you know, that's there, it's a trip. It's usually a buddy's trip. You know, they're set up to cater to that. And I think you see a bit of that in the UK and Scotland. I mean, and it's not a bad thing, but that's, you know, that's the Dumbarnies of the world. That's Kingsbarns. It's Castle Stewart. And they're set up for it. I think, you know, even like Glen Eagles, which has, you know, you tell people about Glen Eagles that it's you know, how old it is, and people are like, whoa, really? Like, I thought it was just, they just told us the Ryder Cup. But the reality is, yeah, there's history there. And I think it's just depending on what you're looking for. I think we, as the Flyers Club, we tend to gravitate towards more the club experience than we do perhaps the resort piece. But that's not to say that the experience there is not authentic. It's just not that club depth that we perhaps are, I guess, so enamored with. And you can feel it when you walk in there. You just feel the history, the smell of the floorboards, you know, like everything about it. So I don't know.
What does a trip like that look like, just out of interest then, you know, stateside, those trips that you're organizing for members and at these places, which you mentioned are quite exclusive? Is it's a kind of, from what I gather, it's almost a ballot model that you operate?
Yeah. So inside the club piece of things, and again, as a member of the Flyers Club, we provide access to some pretty great private golf courses. Now, I'm not at liberty to say publicly what they are, but they are in the same vein of caliber of golf course that you would see in the UK as far as like top 100 in the world. But they are decidedly private. It's not something you can just come off the street. And we've built some really great relationships with some prominent clubs in the United States that we feel we can send a small group to, and feel that they can experience, you know, the history and tradition. We typically try to identify golf courses that are in the same vein, that same feeling that we just discussed about when you walk into, you know, that old clubhouse, and you get that feeling of just so much has happened here in years before. So that does exist in the United States. Unfortunately, it's oftentimes behind closed doors. And so we try to provide that access piece for our members to these historic clubs, you know, supporting it with editorial and, you know, perhaps history, and then exclusive merch around it that's inspired by, you know, the beings that it is. So I'll give you one example is a Myopia Hunt Club up in Massachusetts. It hosted 4 US Opens at the turn of the century. It's a sleepy club. And we've had a really great relationship with them. But it was originally designed, started as it was a hunting club. And so creating kind of merchandise and the experience around that and digging into it. We have a great little kind of speech before our members go out and play. Just the history of the golf course. It still holds some of the highest scoring records for the U.S. Open. It's just a tremendous centerpiece to our schedule. So it's events like that we try to emulate and identify other golf courses throughout the U.S. that we can add for our members.
Yeah, from people I know that have played Myopia, they say it's absolutely fabulous. Is it steps in bunkers and all that sort of stuff? They've got quite a few sort of features of like, nice sort of wooden sleeper steps in bunkers. I'm just basing that probably on some of the pictorial evidence you guys put up. By the way, I want to know the pictures that are on the Instagram. You seem to have a never-ending list of courses where you just roll out yet another world-class photo. Where have these all come from? Because you guys can't have traveled abroad for ages now, and yet there seems to be a steady stream of supply of just golf course photos, and it's just like, it makes you drool.
Well, it's so when we started Fliers in 2016, I was working for the PGA of America, and I left the PGA, and I had met who's now one of the founding partners of Fliers, Omar Rawlings, and I was like, Omar, I'm hopping on a plane. We're going to the UK and Ireland, and we're starting this company. Do you want to come with me? And without hesitation, he says yes. And we hopped on the plane and we went for a full month, just kind of rocking around. And he was with his camera, and I was with my golf clubs, and we literally shot every golf course that we played. We met some amazing people, stories along the way. And, for better or worse, with COVID happening, we really haven't had the opportunity to tell our story, to sit down and do this. And when we first set out, it wasn't, we were never really thinking about, oh my gosh, we're gonna make merchandise, and you guys, we're gonna sell it that way. It was more like, okay, well, we can't travel now. Let's share our story. And so in hindsight, with Omar being there, and I can't express to you, he's such an integral part of Fliers, and his work is so identifiable. 98% of the images you see on there, I'll contribute to 2% of those here and there, but his work is just everything from the product photography that you see to the on-course imagery. That's all him, and his eye, and he's just an incredibly talented, humble individual, and he's from the UK, so even better from that standpoint. And it's good to travel over with somebody like that. I stick out like a sore thumb with my accent going over to the UK, depending on what country, and being English, it does. It's a funny thing with that, but he's just a total juggernaut as far as creative is concerned, and a big part of those imagery. So I think when we were over there, we shot something crazy like 60 or 70,000 photos, and
wow.
We're through them, and all the raw footage is somewhere on some drive somewhere, but we keep going back and finding new things and details and perspectives and new stories. And we wanted to we set out to tell, not just be like, this is hole 5, it's 435 yards, you'd hit a 7-iron off this, that has been done. And so really kind of trying to tie unique stories and experiences to the imagery that is maybe not as deliberate has been always our philosophy, because we just wanted to share more. And so that's where all the photos come from, and they will continue
they're
to.
Incredible. They're absolutely incredible. They're there's some superb images up on there. I'm also curious. So obviously Scotland, I feel like people maybe uncover, I know it's a banned word in today's woke golf generation, but hidden gems, for want of a better term, whether it be the Kilspindys or the Brewers of the world. No one seems to uncover so many in England, and I wonder if that's just by virtue of not having the same pull to those kind of trophy courses. Obviously, you've got the northwest coast of England, but I'm sensing that the demand, or certainly from the clients you guys have in America, it's give me Scotland, maybe Ireland, Scotland again. That seems to be the demand. There doesn't seem to be the same pull into England, which I think is fascinating. Like we recently did a whole piece around Harry Colt and, you know, some of the work there. And there's just so much depth to the courses and the architecture in England. You see much in terms of demand for people, or do they just want to kind of, again, maybe is that, you know, maybe the traveling golfer who just wants to breeze through St. George's, the northwest coast, and off up to Scotland?
I mean, I think that England is decidedly. I think you're right. The gravitation initially for a first trip to the UK is Scotland, and then maybe they go back. They go to Ireland. It's interesting that England kind of plays, you know, maybe into that second or third or fourth trip that if you're going back to the Isles that you're going to. But I think you mentioned the Northwest. It's incredible. Obviously, around London, there's just a tremendous amount of the Heathland golf courses that are there, and then out to George's with Prince's and in places like that. I think it's for better or worse. I think it's just it's a more refined palette, and not because it's just not, I guess, in the forefront of everybody's mind. And there's another, and I'm not sure if you follow the England Golf Project.
Yeah.
Instagram. I think they do a really good job of highlighting kind of the hidden gems in that regard, and they're bringing that out and starting to celebrate it more. And there's also the nuance of just kind of the club piece of things, like when you can play these golf courses, what are the restrictions? How do I get on, that way? And there seems to be an endless, just kind of navigating it. But, I don't know why exactly that is. But I think that there'll be a renewed spirit in England this year, of course, when the Open returns to George's every July. The phone starts ringing off the hook with people being like, I want to play links courses and I want to play in England or wherever the Open is at that time. It's so American, going back to the herd mentality of like, I saw it on TV, I want to do it in real life.
And how do things look on that front? Obviously, it's been a kind of weird last 12 months or so, but as Sam alluded to there, with vaccination rates, I guess, starting to pick up a little bit. Do you kind of feel optimistic with the international travel picking back up next year or so? I mean, there's a lot of people in Scotland, I'm sure, are delighted that they can get tee times on the old course and at the Open venues without a lot of Americans coming over. But I guess things slowly, we could kind of tentatively hope that they're getting back to normal on that regard.
Yeah, I'd like to think that 2022 is going to be a banner year. I think that even towards the end of this year, hopefully we'll still have some of our groups who are holding on. But I think for the most part, it's a two-way street, as we all know. It's like, both countries have to be in a position where they are either accepting or receiving travelers, and until they kind of get it standardized, I don't think, if a traveler wants to go, but the country doesn't want them to come, or, if the country wants them to come, but the traveler's not ready to go, that's that two sides of the coin. And I think, I think hopefully will be flushed out by 22. I think that once we kind of get a standard expectation of what people know they have to do before they go, whether it be vaccinated or, proof of vaccination, or, they do a test, or wherever we land in this whole thing, because I think, you're comparing two different societies, so just using the United States and the UK, where, it's decidedly, in this country, we have a little more of a challenge with just wearing a mask. That has become a politicized piece of things, whereas I feel like you guys haven't left 5 kilometers of your home for the last, 3 months. I think that wouldn't fly. That wouldn't fly in the States. So it's decidedly a different approach, and being respectful of both the cultural differences there. And I think only time will tell us in that regard. But I do think that 2022 will prove to be a banner year. There's just going to be so much demand because the way it's been, we've seen reschedules from 2020 to 2021, and now from 21 to 22. Couple that with 2022 demand of people who just didn't travel or wanted to travel those years now want to go. And even looking at Scotland as an example, the Open is happening there in 2022 in the 150th. So close the old course for 6 weeks. It is madness as far as, the demand is concerned, and even more so pushing it to the outside these other golf courses, like England, like the Highlands in Aberdeen, like Northwest Ireland, places that hopefully will benefit from this demand. It's just going to spill over.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? Because it's easy to say, there's not a limitless ability to keep supplying golf, particularly over those summer months in certain places. So you've got to hope that, there's an opportunity to start putting it in some, places that wouldn't get it originally. You've when we spoke before, we talked about some of the trips you'd been on, and I think you guys have covered everything from, obviously Ireland. We've talked about Scotland, England. You guys have done, I think, a lot of Australia and some of the stuff, particularly the Melbourne sand belts.
Yep.
What about you? So we get into 2022, it's taps on to flying again and trips ahoy. Where do you want to go? Like, what's going to be the big bucket list for Eric?
Great question. Before COVID hit, we were supposed to be in Japan. That was a big one for me.
Wow.
That was another one. I've committed, as we're talking about England, I want to get back to England and do more of a deeper dive. Truth be told, my few times there have not been as the depths. And so I think between Japan and England, those are two that are on my list.
Why Japan? Just on that, like, why Japan? I know is it Hirano, and you've got a lot of Charles Allison stuff out there, but
yeah, I think mainly because of my personal heritage. I've got Japanese heritage there, so I want to go and experience the culture, but I want to see it through the lens of the golfer. And I think Japan is probably the closest market to the United States as far as how private golf courses interact. It's decidedly private. It's very difficult to get on some of the courses, and so it's just a very interesting way for folks perhaps to see it. And so kind of navigating that, I think that's another opportunity for us. I also want to get back to Italy as well. I think what the Ryder Cup is doing with bringing the championship to different courses or just different countries in general, like what they did with France and now with Italy coming up. I think that broadens people's people will be excited to go to Italy now. And now the interesting thing about that is, like, people go for the food and wine and the history and the travel. And now it's like, oh, golf is there. And golf will be like the third or fourth thing people go for. Yeah. But,
that's one of the weird things with the Ryder Cup, isn't it? I mean, and we always talk about it on this podcast. You guys obviously got the Ryder Cup Whistling Straits.
Yeah.
Fabulous golf course. Looks brilliant. Would love to play it. When it's hosted over in Europe, we seem to choose some of the worst newly built golf courses on some of the worst newly built land. Like, this podcast has done plenty of bashing for places like Celtic Manor, but they're not massively appealing places necessarily to play, but they bring an awful lot of revenue. They bring a lot of footfall, and with that opportunity. So I guess, Italy is, again, great opportunity to then find stuff that's on the perimeter where people want to go and play golf as well, because there's got to be adventure there. Just like you go around Paris, there's so much great golf to be played around Paris. Just, would you want to play Le Golf National? Maybe, maybe not, but there's loads of other good stuff around you. So I guess, like you say, where there's interest, there's opportunity.
Yeah, and I think the Ryder Cup is decidedly on just an epic scale of an event that it just requires a certain footprint and just capability to house an event that big. It's just so difficult to put it into, even in some of the old courses here in the United States, the revenue that you're kind of giving up by going to a historic course because, perhaps there's no parking or there's just nowhere for the amenities to be, that you would expect, whether it be like food and beverage or, kind of the merchandising, if you're not able to kind of accommodate, the level of visitors or spectators, it's hard to put it at a golf, some golf courses. I know that oftentimes, I've always wondered that too, though, but why the links golf courses aren't in that? Because, there's a little gamesmanship that happens with the Ryder Cup. We know that there's the course setup and like everything that kind of goes with it. And, if you're going to make it a bomber's course, tighten the fairways, put those pins in places that, force them to hit the Americans are just going to hit it into the rough. And, how do you do that piece of things? And I've always wondered why, perhaps the links courses with that weather and that bit hasn't been, at least in recent years, been a focus for the European team.
It's an interesting one with links courses, because I think when Glen Eagles ended up getting it, I believe St Andrews actually were considering putting in a bid for the Ryder Cup years and years ago now. But it's, the only one I can think of that springs to mind would be going back to somewhere like Birkdale, for example, and the concession there. But as you say, it's where it's, I think, becoming increasingly apparent that teams are setting up courses that suit their kind of respective players' strengths or kind of model of player. Links would just be an obvious choice for a European captain or a European kind of Ryder Cup organization. I'm not quite sure how it all works, the sort of hierarchy of it all. But and I guess another thing is the spectator point. Often a lot of links courses aren't maybe bound by the restrictions on space that a lot of inland courses would have in Europe. But I guess that's another area later this year. Hopefully we have to look forward to seeing that play out, hopefully with fans.
Places like K Club and Glen Eagles and Celtic, and it just ends up I think it's just kind of points to the commercialization of the event itself.
Just shows you, doesn't it? Just so much money behind that event. Anything where it becomes viable. At Glen Eagles, where you got world-class golf courses, to build another one just for the purposes of staging the event. You're just like, wow.
And frankly, the King's course, in my opinion, is one of the best. It's not to knock the PGA. I mean, the PGA Centenary course is decidedly a championship golf course. I get that. But the King's just, when you think of Glen Eagles, you think of the PGA, or at least the American golfer thinks of the PGA course. But the Kings and Queens, I mean, my gosh, those
are lovely, aren't they?
Just brilliant, in my opinion. So
to the point where I think the PGA almost feels empty. Actually, when you play it, you're like, wow, I think that's just an insight into the scale of the event. Is that it literally feels empty if you're just playing that as an ordinary kind of green fit. Yeah, well, I've only played it once, but. Yeah, as Eric was saying, they're the Kings and the Queens, very intimate. They're nice courses. I think they're both under par 70. They're not long at all, but obviously there's really nice scenery, and they are really intimate courses. And the PGA is just like, wow, okay, where are the grandstands? There's definitely supposed to be a grandstand there, and and I imagine it was just an absolutely epic amphitheater. But they're almost only fit for big events. Which is, as you say, maybe that's just kind of speaking to the commercialization of the game as a whole.
Eric, you've been very giving of your time. What can we look forward to seeing from the Flyers in the next few months?
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on. This has been a lot of fun. I guess coming up for Flyers, we're kind of going back through different merch collections and drops that we have coming up, both for our membership and for our visitor store. So a couple of really cool collabs that we have that we won't hint at too much here, but definitely stuff around the majors. And then we have our big kind of 12 days of Flyers, which is kind of leading up to the holidays, and just kind of looking for more and more of those types of collaborations. And I know that we want to revisit that UK only drop again. It's something that we felt there was a lot of excitement around it, and we work with some really great brand partners in that, and so we're hoping to do another one of those before the year's out as well.
It's exciting times ahead.
Awesome.
So, I guess we thank you for joining, and we'll continue to watch with amazement, and if we can't be on one of those events, we're not members, we're not in the States, we can wish you well with them, but we'll certainly enjoy the pictures in the meantime, and hopefully look forward to speaking to you soon. But thanks again, Eric, for joining, and all the best.
Yeah, Sam, Bruce, thank you both so much, and enjoy your newly found golf freedom.
Yeah, we will. Catch up
Watch
soon.
this.